I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, welcoming you to the Alaska Weather Show on this Sunday, July 31st, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide during this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov, the National Weather Service's online present. It brings you to an interactive map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And you just point on the map anywhere. If you have friends or family in different parts of the country, you can check up what the forecast, if there are any watches, warnings, that are advisories affecting them. Most noteworthy on the map this afternoon, we have new flood watches that have been issued for parts of Kentucky that are recovering from catastrophic flash flooding from this past week. We have flash flood watches, flash flood warnings for portions of the west, Nevada down into southeastern California, western Arizona, and then to the north, red flag warnings across a good part of Montana, and then heat advisories and excessive heat warnings for much of the Pacific Northwest as some very hot temperatures and well into the 90s and lower 100s continue in that part of the country. Here in Alaska, west to southwest flow aloft will continue into the week ahead. With this pattern, it means somewhat cooler temperatures and occasionally wet. Even though it did squeak out 80 on Saturday afternoon at Eagle, that was one of the warmest readings in the state. It's going to continue to further dampen the fire danger here as we go through the first couple of weeks here of August, because overall right now the pattern is looking cool statewide and slightly wetter through central and east central areas of the state here coming up for the next couple of weeks. Quick note, July 2022 in Anchorage, Ted Stevens International Airport, fifth wettest July, 4.26 inches of rainfall, very wet month. Merrillfield, the wettest on record at 3.96 inches. Lake Hood could end up being the wettest. So far, the second wettest, it's 3.98 inches, but the data for the 29th and 30th is missing. That's just this past weekend, and we had some additional rainfall that would push it into first place there for Lake Hood, so I'll hopefully have that updated tomorrow. Looking across the state along the northwest coast, west there in Kotzebue Sound, Kivalina, low cloud, some fog, 46 degrees. As we drop further south, another frontal boundary is working its way northeastward along the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint, some drizzle and fog, 53 degrees. And then Soldotna enjoying some sunshine, partly cloudy skies, 64, good there for the salmon fishing on the Kenai River. And then Juneau is kind of a few breaks in the clouds. We have mostly cloudy skies, though some areas of fog, 61 degrees, getting over some passing lighter rain here earlier today. But with ridge of high pressure building in tonight, there are going to be areas of locally dense fog developing across the panhandle late tonight into Monday morning. Fire weather update, cool, humid areas of rain for southern Alaska, isolated showers and a few storms possible over the interior, and light winds overall across the mainland. The outlook coming up here is generally cool weather with periods of rain. There could be a few isolated storms in the interior, but nothing like what we had going on back earlier this month and into late June. Fire danger continues to come down across southern parts of the state. Still some areas of high to very high, especially there in through the Yukon Flats. But as I said, if this pattern continues here over the next couple of weeks, it could largely end the fire season. Let's hope so. Let's look at satellite imagery. Things are improving there in the panhandle as a weak ridge builds in, but that's going to lead to some areas of dense fog tonight. Next frontal system working its way up along the Alaska Peninsula with a low back just southwest of St. Paul. And that's the main weather feature that's going to be pushing up toward Nunavik Island, the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas as we go through later tonight, early on Monday morning. Otherwise, just some low cloudiness. Fog continues along the Arctic coast. So there's that low this afternoon, still to the west of southwest there of St. Paul, with the occluded front beginning now to work its way up along the Alaska Peninsula. Still a few lingering light showers there and some areas of lower cloudiness and fog in the panhandle. But as I mentioned, the ridge will be nudging in that way overnight. That could lead to additional areas of locally dense fog. Low pressure will be centered near Nunavik Island around 4 a.m. this Monday morning with the occluded front working up the west arm of the Alaska Range and pushing northeast of Kodiak Island. That's going to spread more rain into south central areas along Cook Inlet, the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, especially south of the Alaska Range. North of the Alaska Range will be a few scattered showers Monday afternoon, perhaps an isolated storm along the Alcan border. And the same thing on Tuesday. The rain should let up along Cook Inlet and the Kenai, but we'll still see a potential for some scattered showers and isolated storms there in parts of the interior and along the Alcan border. And yet another low will be emerging there on the lower left of your screen, moving into the western and central Aleutians. As I mentioned, this pattern aloft with the west-southwest flow will continue. That'll be the next system to work its way into the mainland as we head here through the Wednesday, Thursday time frame. Lows Monday morning generally above 50 across south central areas and the Panhandle. Temperatures Monday afternoon will be kept down by the cloud cover and some areas of rain, especially the fog in the morning there in the Panhandle. Highs lower 60s there, generally lower 60s around Anchorage on up toward Talkeetna. Further west may only be in the 50s. And then lows Tuesday morning will generally be in the lower mid-50s Panhandle, near 50 or so, slightly above that for south central areas, including Kodiak. And then Tuesday afternoon, if we can see a few breaks open up in the cloud cover, could get back up near 70 at Talkeetna, at least mid-upper 70s in through the Anchorage area. Further north, lows generally 40s to lower 50s along the Yukon River, mid-30s along the Arctic coast, 40s there along the northern and western Seward Peninsula. Temperatures Monday afternoon still could reach lower 70s in some spots to get a few breaks, but that should help fuel a potential, at least for an isolated storm along the Alcan border. Staying in the lower 40s for highs there along the Arctic coast, generally 50s in the Seward Peninsula, but 62 possible there at Nome. And lows again Tuesday morning, generally 30s north slope and along the Arctic coast, but near 50 along the Yukon River. And afternoon highs should generally be in the 60s to a few lower 70s there up through the Yukon River, but remaining generally in the 40s along the Arctic coast. And finally, the southwest. Look for generally the interior, lower 50s, extending down at least most of the Alaska Peninsula, upper mid-40s there for the Aleutians. And then Monday afternoon, temperatures should generally stay 50s west of the Alaska Range, a few areas breaking into the lower 60s. And then Tuesday morning, we expect lows again to be upper 40s along the coast, near 50 inland, and then temperatures Tuesday afternoon may get back up, especially from McGrath on up toward Galena, Ruby. Those areas may be able to get into the upper 60s to near 70. Here is the temperature outlook, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook by the Climate Prediction Center, August 6th through the 10th. Has a likelihood of below to potentially more below normal temperatures there between Anchorage and Bethel there in the southwest interior. So overall, the state looking cooler, and precipitation could average a bit above normal there. Central, east central areas between the Alaska Range and Brooks Ranges. That would be great because that could really further dampen the fire danger. And if this pattern can continue into mid-month, very well could end up ending the most significant fire season we've seen in a while.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's check out your aviation weather for early this week, Monday into Tuesday. Low pressure this Sunday is crossing the lower Bering. It'll be pushing into the southwest coast up through the YK deltas into the southwest interior. Secondary weaker low will develop over the northwestern, north central Gulf as a response to a weakening occluded front that'll work its way eastward through the western Gulf here as we go through Monday afternoon and early Tuesday. Far northern Arctic coast continues to see IFR conditions, and then of course rather widespread IFR conditions anticipated there. Southwest interior back along the southwest coast. Monday afternoon we'll see that moisture and precipitation spread further east, northeastward up across the southwest interior, especially the west arm of the Alaska Range and areas of Prince William Sound along the northwest and north central Gulf Coast. Tuesday morning, IFR conditions anticipated to continue along the Arctic coast, some lower cloud cover and areas of fog. We see better moisture and some precipitation there along and north of the Alaska Range, especially just south of the Yukon River, and also areas along the northern Gulf Coast and pushing up into the far northern Panhandle, especially there around Haines, Skagway. And then for Tuesday afternoon, we see lingering areas of IFR conditions there along the northern panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast back through Yakutat, and also along the Alaska range, and then another area of widespread IFR conditions extending back across especially the eastern and central Aleutians in response to yet another low, because we're in this west-southwest flow pattern aloft as you get up towards 700, 500, 300 millibars. Steering the weather systems about every 2 to 3 days. We're getting one come up out of the far North Pacific across the Aleutians and then working its way across the southern half of the mainland. Anaktuvik Pass should generally see MVFR conditions on Monday, as will Adigan Pass as we go south and westward with that push of moisture, lower cloud cover. Lake Clark and Merrill will generally see IFR conditions during the day on Monday. Same thing at Rainy Pass as we get over toward Windy Pass. Definitely IFR conditions, especially south entrance, southward MVFR once you pop out there on the north entrance. Isabel Pass starting out VFR early Monday, giving way to MVFR conditions. And further east there toward the Elkan border, Mentasta Pass, VFR conditions becoming MVFR. And as we drop down into the Copper River Basin, look at VFR conditions early Monday, giving way to MVFR conditions. And finally, Portage Pass should see MVFR conditions generally become IFR conditions there for Monday afternoon, especially along the east entrance and areas, including Prince William Sound. Chilkoot and White should generally hold on to MVFR conditions during the day on Monday. And looking at the freezing levels, they are highest there along the North Pacific, south of the Gulf of Alaska, and extending up into Vancouver, British Columbia. They fall back down to around 10,000 feet along the Alaska Peninsula, Kenai Peninsula, and into the northern Gulf Coast, and fall back further through the central interior, near and just north of the Yukon River, around 8,000 feet. Greatest threat for icing on Monday will be associated with the moisture that comes inland through the southwest and along the Alaska range, including Prince William Sound, where there could be some considerable moderate icing between 10,000 feet and a flight level of 18,000 feet. Another area way out there in the western Barren between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, though it would be rather isolated out that way. And looking at the upper level jet stream winds, they are strongest. There is a core of 115 to 120 knot upper level west-northwest jet stream winds in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, the north end of the Alaska Peninsula, and then out over the lower Bering north of the central Aleutians, bringing it down to 9,000 feet. We have a couple of weaker low-pressure circulations there at 700 millibars over Cook Inlet and then near the lower Yukon Delta with a 70 knot west-northwest wind max well south of the Alaska Peninsula out over the North Pacific. And the two weak low-pressure circulations continue in the vicinity of the Kenai Peninsula there on Monday, as well as back toward the lower Yukon River Basin, with winds west-northwesterly 40 to 45 knots there across portions of the Alaska Peninsula out over the North Pacific and southwestern Gulf. And this is going to translate to the greatest threat for some considerable moderate turbulence along the eastern Aleutians up through the Alaska Peninsula. On the northeast end of that, surface to 4,000 feet, and then back toward the southwest there, the eastern Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet. So have a safe flight if you are able to get out.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, or GINA, based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Well, Dave, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting us again.
Sure thing. And today we want to talk about identifying burn scars. That would be the burned up area after a wildfire when the flames and the smoke are gone. We can see it if you drive by it on the roadway, of course, but from satellite, we can also identify those places on the land, right?
You know it. You know that expression, ouch, that's going to leave a mark?
Yeah.
After you bang your knee getting out of the car.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the ouch, it's going to leave a mark, that also applies to the landscape. Whenever a wildfire ravages through, it's going to leave a mark on the landscape. After a wildfire burns out, this is called a burn scar.
Okay.
And you can ask yourself, well, that's interesting. We can see a burn scar from space. Right. Then the question is, well, why does that matter?
Okay.
Who cares?
Yeah, fire's over.
Right, the fire is over. We don't need to worry about this anymore. It turns out you kind of do, because burn scars are important. There's this old rule of thumb in the weather business that flood follows fire.
Okay.
The action of the fire in killing off the vegetation, in baking, kiln drying the landscape a little bit, can hinder the land's ability to absorb rainfall. So if you have a fire, especially if it's in complex mountainous terrain, this is classic in California. It can happen somewhat in Alaska too. You get a wildfire in steep, hilly, or mountainous terrain, rips off all the vegetation off the landscape. Then 6 months later, there's a big rainstorm, and you get a flash flood in that area. So flood can follow fire. That's why you got to know where the burn scars are. Secondly, a fire needs fuel to maintain itself. So if there's an old burn scar left over from a year or two ago, and then another summer later here in Alaska in the interior, it's a big wildfire season. If there's a fire advancing toward an old burn scar, well, guess what? That old burn scar can be tougher terrain for that new fire to get through because there's not as much fuel in that burn scar. So they almost act like a natural fire break. These are a couple of reasons why you need to know where those burn scars are. Alaska Fire Service has limited resources. They want to put their people and their equipment where it does the most good. They need to know, well, this is an area where there's no burn scar. We better put people here because that fire could really run.
So really important for weather forecasters and fire weather forecasters for sure.
Oh yeah.
But then how do weather satellites actually detect those burn scars?
Good question.
Thanks.
Well, let's turn the Wayback Machine to the summer of 2015. That was a very active year. We've got a picture here taken up in the White Mountains. This is one of the fires in progress that summer, and if you look real close, you can almost see Frodo throwing the ring into the volcano there. So that's quite the vision. Well, let's look at a visible image. Here we are in Alaska's interior. This is before the fires got out of the cage in early summer of 2015. Let's zoom into the western interior here. Again, this is a weather satellite image of visible light, what the human eye can see. We're into the middle reach of the Yukon Valley there in the western interior, Galena area. And this is just a beautiful visible day. Nothing much going on. It's in early June before the fires really got active. But then in 2015, the fires got loose, especially in that western interior. Here's another image. The same satellite pass as that visible image, but now we're not quite looking at visible light.
Very different.
There's a slight change here. This image incorporates something called the veggie band. 0.86 micron wavelength. The micron's very tiny, but that wavelength responds to vegetation, the chlorophyll. So trees and grasses reflect that part of the electromagnetic spectrum back to the satellite. And so the satellite sees that. When signal comes at that wavelength to the satellite, we know, there's some vegetation growing there. This is great. You can identify coastlines so easily because you go from vegetation to water. Turns out if you have a burn scar, guess what? You burned away the vegetation, so that's going to show up. We're going to do a before, during, and after kind of look here. And so we're looking at before. So in this image, we got a lot of green out there. That's wonderful. Another fun thing about this kind of imagery is you can see down in the Alaska Range in the southeast corner of the image, it's blue. That's glaciers and snow in the mountains. So this is not really what the human eye can see. This is these wavelengths are beyond human vision, but we've made them look certain colors. So the vegetation looks green. Now let's look at that same kind of satellite recipe, but during the fires. This is in July. The fires are loose. You can see the smoke in the middle of the image, the smearing look of the smoke, and then we can see some clouds that are white. Icy clouds are blue. So this is in July of 2015. The fires are doing their thing. We're burning up millions of acres. Now let's go to September. The fires are out. The audience has left the theater. You know, the event's over, right? We're done. But guess what? Now look at those brown patches.
Look at that.
All of those places are where the fire has burned away the vegetation. So you can see where the fires were. You can add up these perimeters, get acreage burned and such. And so that's good to know. Now remember, flood follows fire, and these are also natural fire breaks. So you need to know where these guys are. In the course of the 2015 summer season, we went from before with not much burn scar in this area to just a couple months later, we can see so much burn scarring on the landscape. What's interesting too about the satellite and looking at burn scars is you realize that burn scars are the gift that keeps on giving. You can forget that a couple of years ago maybe there was a fire in a certain area, but the satellite won't forget. So in the summertime we get wildfires in Alaska, but guess what? In the visible imagery here we can see the burn scars just a little bit, but they're not as prominent as in that veggie band. But then you can't see them at all if you cover them up with snow, right?
Exactly.
So here's an image from the middle of the winter time.
Wow.
And snow on the ground by this recipe looks blue. Again, these are wavelengths of light that the human eye can't really see. We're getting up into the infrared, near infrared. And the way we've assigned colors is if there's snow on the ground or there's a glacier, it looks blue, kind of intuitive. So this is early April of the following year, 2016.
Okay.
We're just about to get into breakup. We've got a lot of snow on the ground, and now it's all going to melt. And as the snow melts, then you get our final image here. Doesn't this look familiar? This looks like a lot of what we saw in September of the previous summer. So this is the spring of the next year. The fires themselves might not have overwintered, they're gone, but the fire scar does. And as the snow melts away, and then you have breakup, and then you have green up, whenever the leaves come out, the grass comes back, except in the burned areas, they're having a tough time because everything got burned off the previous year. So you can see these scars even the next summer, multiple years. It depends on what kind of vegetation there is. You know, some of the tussocky tundra grasses, they'll grow back really quick, but to get a forest to come back, that'll take much longer. So these burn scars, eventually the landscape will fill in the burn scar. It will heal itself, if you want to use that metaphor. But for the next few years, you can still keep track of these on satellite. And again, the reason we want to do that is that the burn scar can facilitate a flood, and it can act like a fire break. So there you are, the
Fascinating
veggie
tools. So if you're a weather satellite and you're looking at my bowl of vegetables here, you might be able to pick out which one's the pea, which one's the tomato, and which one's the carrot, and apply that information precisely to whatever it is you're working on there. That is really fascinating stuff, that we have that capability from so high above the planet Earth, and Alaska for that matter.
Yep, eat your veggies.
Yes, definitely. I think I will. I'm hungry. Thanks so much for joining us again, Eric, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you right here next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
It's now time to conclude the show with the marine weather segment and looking at the sea ice edge. There's still some ice that lingers there along the Arctic coast, lower Beaufort Sea, and it'll be slow to melt off. Also, ice lingers along the Russian coast. So other than the normal gradual melt off that we expect through the mid and late summer period, things are proceeding as normal. And across the inner channels, winds will be south 10 to 20 knots as we go from north of Petersburg up through Lynn Canal, with waves 2 to as high as 4 feet in Lynn Canal. Northwest winds 15 knots with 3-foot waves down toward Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Otherwise, along the outer Gulf Coast, west winds generally 10 to 15 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet. On Tuesday, another frontal system will be pushing in from the west with some additional rain, and winds will be southeast to south 15 knots for the inner channels with 3-foot waves. Outer coast winds turn westerly, especially south of Gustavus, around 15 to 20 knots, and waves 7 to 8 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf and Cook Inlet for Monday, we're going to start out variable winds in the north end of Cook Inlet, 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Southeast winds at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 15 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. And then west-southwest winds off the Kenai, 20 to 25 knots in the open waters of the Gulf, and waves 7 feet. On Tuesday, winds turn more northwesterly there across areas off the Kenai into Prince William Sound, 15 to 20 knots. Waves a couple of feet in Prince William Sound, up to 7 feet off the Kenai. And look for westerly winds up to 30 knots at the entrance of Cook Inlet to just northeast of Kodiak, and waves running there 7 to as high as 9 feet. Across much of the region, Monday for Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be southwesterly to 30 knots. On the North Pacific and Gulf side, waves 10 to 14 feet. Bristol Bay on the Bering side, 8 feet, upwards to 12 feet north of Cold Bay. And then for Tuesday, winds do come down a bit. Look for westerly winds, southwest west winds coming down to around 20-25 knots. Waves 5 feet Shelikof Strait, 7 to 8 feet there on the North Pacific side. More variable winds developing north of Cold Bay, and waves generally 5 to 6 feet on the Bering side. Throughout the eastern Aleutians, look for westerly winds to 30 knots, turning southwesterly and coming down to 20 knots as you get west of Nikolsky through Atka and Adak. Waves on the North Pacific side will be coming down from 14 to near 8 feet with time. 13 to 6 feet with time across the Bering. Another low will be crossing the western half of the Aleutians on Tuesday. Ahead of it, look for south-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. North Pacific side waves 9 to 10 feet and generally 5 to as high as 8 feet as you get there north of Atka and Adak. On Monday, north winds will be occurring down there along Norton Sound to north of St. Lawrence Island, 15 to 20 knots, waves 2 to 4 feet. Winds will be generally out of the southwest to west, 20 to 25 knots, south of Nunavik Island and back towards St. Paul and St. George. Waves there in the southeast Bering, 7 to 9 feet. Tuesday, westerly winds 10 to 15 knots into Norton Sound and south of St. Lawrence Island. Variable north side of Nunavik Island in the vicinity of Makoriak. And then southeast winds 20 knots with 4-foot waves in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. Along the Arctic coast, winds will be northeasterly, 10 knots or so, waves a couple of feet. Offshore flow easterly to northeast winds down along the northwest coast, and waves turning into Kotzebue Sound out of the northwest at 10 knots. Waves generally 2 to 3 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea. Turning northerly, 20 knots, 4-foot waves on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And then on Tuesday, easterly winds along the Arctic coast to 15 knots, waves a couple of feet. Southeasterly winds offshore flow to 15 knots along the northwest coast, Utqiagvik down toward Cape Lisburne. Eventually turn more south-southwesterly through the lower Chukchi Sea north of the Bering Strait with waves of 2 to 3 feet. And westerly winds to 15 knots south of the Bering Strait on the north side of St. Lawrence Island with waves running around 3 feet. Quick check of the surface weather map. We have weakening low pressure up there in the northwestern Gulf with a frontal system working west toward the Panhandle that'll spread more rain into the Panhandle, especially Monday night into Tuesday. And some scattered showers, isolated storms along the Alcan border. Same thing reoccurring on Tuesday with that low in the northern Gulf working its way toward the northern Gulf and weakening. Another low will be crossing the western and central Aleutians, bringing the next system in this west to southwest flow that will eventually influence the mainland. That wraps up the show for tonight, and thank you for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.